Hi folks, welcome back. It's been a while since the last video, but there hadn't been that much development ever since that spike in silver and the subsequent pullback. Silver had been at pretty stable levels. We see it hovering around the 170 to 180 range here. But what we need to talk about is the more important and extremely impactful event that's going on and significantly impacting global events. I'm talking, of course, about the war in Iran. Now, for a general context, the war in Iran has started with so the war in Iran here has really started with a subsequent series of escalations. Now, what's happening right now is Iran is hitting a lot of oil refineries in neighboring areas. Saudi Arabia, UAE, I believe also Kuwait. And what happens is that Israel and the US are hitting Iranian oil refineries as well. Iran's oil goes mostly to China. $80 to 90% goes to China. So the US doesn't care a lot about damaging these oil refineries in Iran. But what's really important to understand is that when Iran retaliates by destroying all these other refineries in the Middle East, they are significantly crippling the global supply of oil. So when we look at the global supply of oil across all regions in the world, we see that the US is doing fine because, we've got Venezuela over here. That we just kidnapped their president. We've basically taken over their country, and we are slowly starting to ramp up production of oil there. That's going to be fantastic for us. But what we need to look at is what's going on over in this small area. Now, there's something called the Strait of there's a chokehold on the Persian Gulfway, and there's a small segment of 12 miles, the Strait of Hormuz, is extremely important because this is how all the oil gets out from the Persian Gulf. Now, if we look carefully, Iran basically controls this. You do see a little bit of Oman and UAE on this side, and the US establishes a lot of bases in places like Kuwait, UAE, Qatar, and Bahrain, specifically because they want to ensure security of oil, or they want to make sure that they can threaten Iran with sanctions and et cetera, et cetera. But the long story short is that the US has had significant amounts of influence on these neighboring countries around Iran. And Iran's oil typically flows out this way, but all these other countries also have oil that also flow out this way through this Strait of Hormuz. So as we look at this right here, this Strait of Hormuz, super, super important for global geopolitical reasons. Now, if you don't already know, generally speaking, the US maintains its military to try and make sure that everyone pays for oil with US dollars. It is the global currency for that reason. Iran knows that they can't fight a conventional warfare against the United States because the US military is massive and has basically an infinite amount of money. It's probably why we don't have free healthcare. There's that common meme, why Americans don't have free healthcare military. If you've seen this meme before, basically, it's, let me see if I can find an image of it. So it's often quoted when people talk about how nobody should F around with America because America's military is so big that we end up sacrificing our own healthcare plans to continuously fund this war machine. And this is a little bit of satire, a little bit of truth, but the general point is that our military is massive, so Iran can't just fight a conventional warfare. So they fight something called asymmetric warfare. This is how people fought in Vietnam against the United States. And basically what this is you want to try and deplete resources. So for example, in Vietnam, what people would do is injure soldiers rather than completely eliminate them. What that would do is when you injure a soldier, you need other soldiers to support that person or to carry that person back. So you're depleting at least 2 soldiers in each of those cases when they're incapacitated, but not fully unalived. So when we look at this situation here in Iran, we see multiple things coalescing. Number one, they're using very cheap drones and very quickly depleting the expensive missiles that the US is trying to produce. Number two, they are attacking a bunch of oil refineries around the world, well, specifically in the Middle East, but with huge, huge impact to oil prices around the world. And then number three is that they are continuously doing this in a way that is cost effective for them. If they continue to hold this little segment, this little strip of water, the Strait of Hormuz, then they will be able to keep oil prices very, very high. They are damaging America by damaging the United States dollar and by damaging the US economy, the SP 500. So we can look in the past month. This is what Iran has done to the SP 500. This is actually an extremely effective way to hit back at the American government, because the American government wants to protect capital. It wants to protect the interests of shareholders, basically. I mean, at this point, everybody knows America is run by the corporations. So how do you damage them? You damage their profits. You damage their stability. Iran has done this effectively, while also galvanizing a lot of Muslims from other areas and potentially radicalizing them as a martyr of this particular struggle. Now, as they start to galvanize more and more folks to these efforts, that can potentially lead to ongoing conflicts in other areas and destabilization of other places. But the main focus and economic impact that we want to talk about today, and really what we want to continue to pay attention to, is the fact that oil prices are going crazy. As of this morning, I looked up the oil prices in my area and they went up, I think, 50 cents. I'm in California. And I think in other places it's already shot up at least a couple dozen cents. Iran has threatened that they will increase the oil price per barrel to potentially up to $200. And they say, you know what? You want to keep fighting with us? How do you like $200 barrels? So this is what they're threatening. Now, based on my initial research, I looked at a couple of analysts and I've asked AI to look over some of those reports with me, summarize some stuff. It seems like 120 to 150 is not unrealistic for the price per barrel, especially without any additional supply. If we talk about basic economics, if there's the same amount of demand, but supply starts to get a lot less, then the people who are selling it are just going to jack up the prices because they can. That's what we're seeing. We're seeing global energy prices going up significantly. And if you think oil is just that, it's just gasoline, you are completely missing the point. Airline stocks, completely getting decimated. Technology still relies on a lot of the energy infrastructure grid, If your energy levels are more expensive, that drives up the cost of production. If you're in any kind of hardware or any kind of physical material supply chain, the cost of transporting your goods has gone up. If people are traveling less because the price of travel is more expensive, then people won't be able to offer as many services or pay for as many services. So then you have companies like Uber and Lyft potentially starting to have some issues. Gig work, when that involves transporting by cars that are dependent on gasoline, that could be an issue. Any kind of plastics from oil are going to be a problem. These polymers are going to come from oil. So what you need to understand is that so much of the world relies on oil. Whether it's sweet or crude, sweet oil has less sulfur, crude oil has more sulfur. That's generally the simplification there. The world relies on oil, and the entire global economy may shudder at the cost of $200 per barrel oil. This is some unprecedented crap that's happening in our world right now. So, as we start to see what happens next, the G7 has had an emergency meeting as of this morning, and that's why I'm making this video right now, because I want to talk about what I'm doing, what I'm looking for, what I expect might happen. G7 has an emergency action that they can do, which is they can basically release a whole bunch of emergency reserves of oil. They can say, hey, look, we've already stockpiled a whole bunch of oil. We will sell these to the highest bidders. By increasing the supply, they're able to decrease the amount of price in raises on average consumers. But the problem is these emergency oil reserves have a finite amount of impact. And if we look at, for example, how much 400 million barrels can impact the global economy, it can mitigate maybe 20 to 40 days of a Hormuz closure. So if Iran is able to hold out for 60 days, for 2 months, we are in trouble. There are other things that could come into play. We might buy more oil from Russia, one of our sworn enemies. I say that as saying the U.S. is sworn enemies with Russia, and ironically, they may become oil dependent. No, sorry, not the U.S., but other countries in the world that don't have oil and need to import it, like, say, Japan or the EU, the UK. America, for the most part, is able to get oil from itself because you have places like Texas, you have places like Venezuela, you have Canada nearby, all of these oil producing allies or regions that are relatively close to the US. We here in the US will not be impacted as much. There may be gasoline lines, there may actually be that, but we will be nowhere near in dire situation as countries like Japan, which are completely reliant on imported oil. Now, the important thing to take away from all of this is that we have a way to blunt the damage of the price spike. But we are putting a Band-Aid on a long-term problem. It takes months, potentially years, to set up refineries or to repair them or to actually start producing more oil. That's why we had to lock down Venezuela early. And even though we've already locked down Venezuela, it's basically a colony at this point. Even though we now control Venezuelan oil, we still need weeks, months, maybe years before we can really scale up production of those oil barrels. In the meantime, in the next 6 months, at least in the next 6 months, If we don't release those oil reserves, something like that 400 million barrels, which is just a random estimate, then we are going to suffer tremendously after 2 or 3 months. This is a really crazy position to be in. I liken this to the pandemic, where this is something that basically impacts everybody in the entire world in some way, because oil is so heavily a part of our global economy, and it sends significant ripples and waves of shock throughout everything. So the most important thing from an investing perspective for me is to protect any of my assets that I can. So I have pulled out from the markets right now because I don't believe in anything at this point. I am short airlines, and this is not investment advice. I'm just talking through my rationale and what I'm thinking about doing. This is not an advocacy for any of this, and timing really does matter a lot if you want to get the right amount of gains, because if you don't time it right, you end up buying high and selling low, losing a lot of money. So right now, here's what I expect to happen. G7 comes out of this emergency meeting and they say, yeah, we're going to release these barrels. We're going to release X 100 million barrels. This is going to keep the global economy afloat until the war with Iran is settled. And the US is going to try to come in, boots on the ground, do a blitzkrieg on Iran with Israel, and really try to take over the whole country as fast as they can, or attack them as much as they can to get them to surrender so that there can be global stability in the economy again. That's what I'm guessing will be the attempt. Iran, on the other hand, because they're so dug into the mountains, it'll be extremely, extremely hard for them to be defeated, especially within just 2 to 3 months. Because they have bunkers, because they have tunnels. I think of it like Vietnam, where the US states, oh, we're going to get this over with really fast. It's going to be a really quick win for us. And then we get slogged down for years in this battle because our adversaries are fighting on their home territory. They are fighting for potentially religious ideology, potentially for martyrdom and things like that. Whereas our people are fighting more for, well, I'll let you make the conjectures on that. So our battle with Iran may potentially be a long, drawn-out battle and really a war of attrition. And in the meantime, oil prices are going to continue going up while temporarily coming down due to those oil reserves coming out. So what I'm doing is I'm waiting for the announcement from the G7 on how many barrels they're releasing and over what period of time. Because I think that that's going to give us a lot of information about whether or not it's sustainable, number one, to do that kind of oil reserve release. Number two, how soon will the impact of those actions come about? Because just because you say you're going to start releasing oil doesn't mean it happens right away. You need to first go through the whole physical operation of getting that oil out. So usually what you do is you need to transport that oil onto trucks or something, and then first you have to get them out. You might have to pump water into it or something. I was reading very briefly on this, so I might be wrong, but it seemed like you store them in salt caves or something, pump water to get them out. Then you have to make sure that you're creating the right kind of oil, whether that's sweet, light, or crude. There are all these different kinds of oils, basically, and you have to make sure that you're getting the demand for these right. You have to transport them. This is going to take days, potentially weeks. So in the meantime, oil's price would fluctuate and be extremely dynamic. So what's the What's the timing on that? I don't know. I don't know when the G7 is going to make the announcement. I don't know when they're actually going to come to an understanding of what things are going. And if you look at our economy right now, the economy in the US is also not doing great. The unemployment seems to be going up. Employment, non-farm employment change was down 92K. And it was only expected to be down, actually, it was expected to be up 58K. So this is a significant surprise. Core retail sales are down. Retail sales are a little bit up. And average hourly earnings are a tiny bit up. But generally, I think this right here, the non-farm employment change, is one of the biggest problems, because that is indicating that we are in potentially a position that's, it's probably clear to people out there. You feel it. The economy is contracting, and you don't feel like there's a positive horizon. You have AI taking over a lot of people's jobs. Young people can't find work. You have this whole Iran situation driving up costs. Powell is due to make another decision on the interest rates. And in consideration of where inflation is right now and where everything is going, it's very likely that, in my book, that he and the rest of the committee decide to keep interest rates the same, meaning we could be driven into more recessionary-like conditions. We can actually go CME, what is it? Likelihood of interest rate cuts. Fed Watch, yeah. I think this is the one that I like to look at the graph of. So they have a 97.3% chance of a target rate at 350, 375. I think that is basically the same. Yes, so there's a 97% chance that they keep the rate the same right now. Things don't look good, guys. Things are not looking great. We'll continue to monitor the situation, and I hope you all stay safe out there. I'm personally probably going to start getting some gasoline cans if I can, and storing those. I do drive a hybrid, but I think that it would be good to have a little bit of gasoline on the sides in case there are lines at the pump. And even if there aren't lines at the pump, I can just use the the gasoline that I have, like when my car gets low or whatever. I think it's better to have than to have not, because I don't want to be paying, let's say, 50% more for gasoline in the coming months. I'd rather have something on the back of my hand ready to go. That's just me. I don't know how much of this is fear-mongering and how much of this is genuinely really, really significant and bad. But I think it's probably somewhere in between, where it's kind of like the pandemic. The pandemic was extremely impactful to the world. And yes, there were a lot of negative consequences in some ways, some positive. I think this one in general is actually more negative, because it just makes the cost of everything higher and a lot of things more difficult. It creates a lot of international instability, and it also creates a ton of uncertainty. In the long run, what would happen? I think that there will be a distributed system of energy production. I think that people will start to realize, crap, we can't keep relying on XYZ countries for oil. We really need to start building our own nuclear reactors. We need to start finding alternative energy sources, or making things more energy efficient. So that's my take on that. Take from it what you will, but let's continue watching those oil prices, staying safe out there, and trying to make sure that we avoid $200 per barrel, hopefully, with fingers crossed. But I say this for the sake of humanity, but I am potentially profiting off of rising oil prices because I am very bullish on the oil futures. I made 20 grand today. I think it was like, it was overnight, from Friday to Monday. But at this point, it's not really, it doesn't feel great when you're making money and everybody else is losing money. But unfortunately, that is kind of just part of the game, I suppose. I hope you also continue staying safe. Thanks for following. Hope you catch me in the next one. Bye-bye.